August 7th, 1942. Guadalcanal's jungle was alive with heat and the stench of decay. Thick humidity clung to every uniform, every face. Insects buzzed relentlessly, and the cries of unseen animals echoed through the dense foliage. U.S. Marines crouched along the narrow ridges, rifles ready, eyes scanning the shadows. The beachhead behind them was a skeleton of hastily dug trenches and sandbags, every line of fire carefully prepared. Somewhere beyond the trees, the Japanese army moved, silent, disciplined, unaware that the terrain itself had become a weapon against them. Sweat ran into eyes, mixing with the grime of weeks in the tropics. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, carried the weight of life and death. The Marines had endured days of artillery and sniper fire, disease, and sleepless nights. But tonight, the real test would come. Across the island, Japanese troops advanced, their formations tight, determined. They carried rations that had long begun to spoil, weapons slick with sweat, minds focused on the mission: reclaim the island, drive the invaders into the sea. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. The night was tense, thick with anticipation and the raw smell of earth and salt water. Every man knew that once contact was made, there would be no retreat. The island had become a crucible, and somewhere in the darkness, the first shots would soon erupt, igniting a campaign that would break an army, reshape a theater of war, and etch a night of endurance, terror, and survival into history. Context/background, Section 1. By mid-1942, the Pacific War had reached a critical juncture. Japan's rapid expansion across Southeast Asia and the Pacific had stretched its forces thin, and the Allies were beginning to reclaim the initiative. Guadalcanal, a small island in the Solomon Islands chain, had emerged as a strategic linchpin. Controlling it meant dominating sea lanes, threatening Japanese supply lines to New Guinea, and denying Japan forward airfields that could threaten Allied operations. The Japanese army had already invested heavily in the island. Thousands of soldiers were stationed in dense jungle encampments, struggling with limited supplies, tropical diseases, and oppressive heat. Malaria, dysentery, and exhaustion were as lethal as any Allied weapon. Food shortages meant rations were meager, often spoiled, forcing soldiers to scavenge from the land or accept the consequences of starvation. Morale was sustained by discipline and duty, yet the stress of constant surveillance, intermittent artillery fire, and the ever-present threat of night assaults weighed heavily. For the Allies, Guadalcanal represented both opportunity and danger. The U.S. Marines, seasoned by campaigns in the Pacific and North Africa, understood the challenges of jungle warfare. Engineers worked feverishly to establish defensive positions, sandbagging trenches, constructing barricades, and pre-sighting fields of fire. Artillery positions were chosen to dominate the narrow ridges and choke points through which the Japanese would be forced to advance. Every patrol, every reconnaissance mission, mapped the terrain and cataloged potential ambush points. Tactics evolved from the bitter lessons of earlier campaigns. Direct frontal assaults had proven deadly. The key to survival was preparation, patience, and controlled engagement. Marines were trained to hold their fire until Japanese soldiers entered pre-designated kill zones, where overlapping machine gun fire, grenades, and mortars could maximize casualties while minimizing friendly losses. The plan relied on discipline and nerve. One premature shot could compromise the entire defense. The Japanese, meanwhile, adhered to their doctrine of relentless aggression. Night attacks and banzai charges were common, designed to surprise and overwhelm defenders. Discipline and courage were emphasized above all, even in the face of disease, fatigue, and starvation. Their commanders understood the risk, yet doctrine dictated that withdrawal or hesitation was unacceptable. Every soldier carried the weight of honor, culture, and expectation, advancing through the oppressive jungle with grim determination. As night fell, both sides had committed fully to their roles. Marines concealed in trenches, exhausted but alert, waited for the Japanese to enter the kill zones. The Japanese pressed forward, confident in training and momentum. The stage was set for a collision of preparation and aggression, a night that would test endurance, strategy, and the very limits of human will. The environment of Guadalcanal was as formidable as any army. The island's jungle was dense, tangled with vines and towering trees that blocked sunlight and created a humid, stifling canopy. Rain fell unpredictably, turning narrow paths into mud and slowing movement, while disease, malaria, dysentery, and tropical infections claimed more lives than bullets. Japanese soldiers suffered especially. Long supply lines made fresh food scarce, and many carried rations that were weeks old, sometimes infested or rotting. Heat, exhaustion, and hunger eroded both physical strength and morale. Allied forces exploited these weaknesses. U.S. Marines established fire bases and observation posts on ridgelines, controlling the limited approaches through the jungle. Patrols probed the enemy's positions, identifying natural choke points where Japanese soldiers would be funneled into kill zones. Naval and air support further constricted Japanese supply lines, striking at barges, resupply convoys, and reinforcements attempting to reach the island. Over time, attrition took its toll. Japanese units became fragmented, exhausted, and under strength, while disease and starvation reduced their combat effectiveness as much as Allied firepower did. Psychological pressure was relentless. Japanese soldiers operated under the constant threat of sudden ambushes or overwhelming fire. Confidence in offensive tactics began to erode under repeated failures, and the oppressive conditions of the jungle amplified every fear, every moment of hesitation. Allied intelligence reports noted that Japanese morale was fragile. Commanders were forced to issue increasingly desperate orders to maintain cohesion. Meanwhile, the Marines endured their own hardships, exposure, tropical illnesses, and the constant tension of night attacks. But their positions, discipline, and preparation provided a decisive advantage. The defensive network of trenches, foxholes, machine gun nests, and mortars allowed them to control the battlefield with precision, converting Japanese aggression into vulnerability. By late 1942, Guadalcanal had become a crucible. Disease, attrition, and the relentless firepower of Allied forces broke Japanese units into isolated pockets. The island was no longer simply a battlefield. It was a trap designed by nature and strategy alike. Soldiers on both sides understood that survival depended on skill, nerve, and luck. Every step through the jungle carried risk. Every decision could mean life or death. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only weapons and tactics, but the limits of human endurance. The grinding pressure of jungle warfare, combined with strategic attrition, would ultimately break the Japanese army, marking Guadalcanal as a turning point in the Pacific War. The human angle. Guadalcanal was a trial of endurance, a theater where human will was tested as much as weapons or tactics. U.S. Marines crouched in trenches, eyes strained through the jungle darkness, listening for every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. Sweat poured down their faces, dripping into rifles and onto the mud-streaked uniforms that clung to their bodies. The oppressive heat and relentless humidity made every breath laborious, every movement exhausting. Yet the men held their positions with unwavering focus. The Japanese soldiers, moving silently through the jungle, faced their own human trials. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion gnawed at their resolve, yet doctrine demanded they press forward. Banzai charges and night assaults were not mere tactics, they were code. Honor, duty, and expectation compelled them to advance through the heat, mud, and bullets, even when death seemed certain. Survivors later recalled moments when fear and pain collided with sheer willpower, pushing men forward into near-impossible odds. In both camps, the psychological strain was immense. For the Marines, restraint was essential. Premature firing could compromise the entire defense. For the Japanese, courage alone could not overcome attrition and precise Allied firepower. Guadalcanal was not merely a battlefield. It was a crucible of endurance, where human resolve met the raw brutality of war. The technological angle. Weapons and equipment shaped the outcomes on Guadalcanal as decisively as courage or strategy. U.S. Marines relied on a combination of M1 Garand rifles, Browning M1917, and M1919 machine guns, hand grenades, and mortars, all meticulously positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. Every weapon system was integrated into the defensive plan, calibrated to maximize the effect on the advancing Japanese troops while minimizing Marine exposure. Japanese soldiers carried rifles, bayonets, and grenades, effective in close combat, but ill-suited against prepared kill zones. Their weapons offered mobility and stealth, but could not counter the overlapping firepower, artillery, and coordinated barges delivered by the Marines. Even technological advantages, such as bayonet proficiency or night stealth, were neutralized by careful preparation and control of terrain. Illumination technology, flares, muzzle flashes, and signal lights was used strategically. Marines revealed enemy positions at calculated moments, directing concentrated fire where it would inflict maximum casualties. Technology alone did not win the night, but when combined with discipline and planning, it transformed a defensive position into a near-impenetrable trap. The tactical angle. Guadalcanal's dense jungle dictated tactical innovation. Marines created controlled kill zones along narrow jungle paths and ridgelines, ensuring that Japanese attackers would funnel into lethal crossfire. Trenches, foxholes, and barricades were arranged to cover every approach. Mortar teams were placed to reach blind spots, while machine gun positions overlapped to prevent gaps. Timing was critical. Marines were trained to hold fire until the enemy entered the kill zones, maximizing casualties and minimizing waste. Commanders coordinated across sectors with hand signals and whispered orders, synchronizing volleys and grenade throws. Any miscalculation could allow the enemy to disperse or exploit a gap, but meticulous preparation ensured that each step of the Japanese advance was anticipated. The result was a deadly paradox. The enemy's aggression, normally an advantage, was transformed into vulnerability. Momentum became a liability, and every advance into the kill zones brought soldiers closer to the calculated point of destruction. Guadalcanal was tactical mastery in its most brutal form, where restraint and preparation outweighed raw force. The enemy angle. The Japanese army approached Guadalcanal with aggression and confidence, yet they faced mounting disadvantages. Supply lines were stretched thin across the Solomon Islands, making food, ammunition, and medical care scarce. Soldiers carried what little they had, often spoiled or insufficient for sustained combat. Malaria, dysentery, and exhaustion weakened their bodies even before they faced the Marines' prepared defenses. Doctrinally, they relied on relentless night assaults and banzai charges. Training emphasized courage, cohesion, and the refusal to retreat, but these principles collided with the realities of attrition. The overlapping kill zones and concentrated firepower of the Marines transformed aggressive tactics into catastrophic vulnerability. The Japanese soldiers' own discipline became a double-edged sword. Momentum drove them forward, but into a meticulously prepared trap. Accounts from survivors reveal the psychological shock. Entire squads were annihilated in seconds, leaving few organized units to continue the advance. The disconnect between doctrine and reality fractured morale, forcing commanders to issue desperate orders as chaos spread. Guadalcanal exposed the fragility of rigid tactics against adaptive, prepared defenses. The leadership angle. Command decisions shaped the battle as decisively as firepower. Marine officers and NCOs had studied every ridge, jungle path, and clearing. Positions were assigned with precision. Each man knew his sector. Every arc of fire was pre-calculated, and coordination relied on discipline honed through rigorous training. Officers moved between trenches under darkness and enemy fire, signaling, adjusting, and reinforcing as the Japanese advance unfolded. Their leadership was calm, calculated, and exacting, every choice affecting hundreds of lives. Japanese leadership, in contrast, faced impossible conditions. Commanders pressed men forward despite exhaustion, starvation, and mounting casualties. The doctrine of aggressive offense clashed with the brutal realities of Guadalcanal's terrain and the Marines' preparation. Efforts to rally fragmented units were often futile, as the overlapping kill zones and jungle chaos undermined cohesion. Leadership under fire demanded more than courage. It demanded adaptation, which Japanese commanders struggled to implement. The moral and psychological angle. The Battle of Guadalcanal imposed an extraordinary moral and psychological burden on both sides. For the Marines, the victory came at the expense of witnessing overwhelming carnage. Soldiers who had trained for discipline and control saw hundreds of enemy soldiers killed in concentrated zones, a necessary act, yet harrowing in human terms. Fatigue, fear, and adrenaline intertwined, leaving lasting impressions of the night's terror. For the Japanese, the experience was devastating on both strategic and personal levels. Courage and doctrine collided with unyielding firepower, disease, and exhaustion. Morale was shattered as units were destroyed, commanders forced into impossible decisions, and soldiers realized that honor and aggression could not always overcome prepared defenses. The psychological toll would reverberate through future campaigns, shaping Japanese planning and the mindset of surviving soldiers. Guadalcanal was not just a test of tactics or weapons. It was a trial of human endurance, discipline, and resilience. The night's events demonstrated how preparation, terrain, and strategy could break the will of even the most committed forces, redefining the limits of both courage and suffering in modern warfare. Night descended over Guadalcanal like a heavy curtain, draping the jungle in near-complete darkness. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of wet earth, and the distant tang of smoke from sporadic artillery. U.S. Marines crouched in foxholes, rifles leveled, eyes scanning the blackened foliage. Every man knew the plan. Hold fire until the enemy entered the kill zones, then unleash coordinated devastation. At 2200 hours, the first Japanese units moved into position. Soldiers advanced along narrow jungle paths, their footsteps muffled by mud and foliage, their breathing shallow. Confidence and doctrine propelled them forward, but the terrain worked against them. The narrow ridges funneled men into concentrated lines, perfectly aligned with Marine fields of fire. Then it began. Machine gun fire erupted in sudden, synchronized volleys. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness, illuminating faces frozen in shock. Mortars pounded clustered formations, shattering momentum and creating chaos. Grenades detonated in tight groups, scattering debris and further isolating attackers. The kill zones were no longer a concept. They were lethal reality. The Japanese soldiers faltered. Some fell instantly. Others surged forward, compelled by training and honor, only to be met by the next wave of fire. Officers attempted to rally squads, but in the overlapping arcs of machine guns and mortars, cohesion dissolved. Every advance brought men deeper into a trap from which escape was nearly impossible. Marines maintained their composure, rotating weapons, reloading under pressure, adjusting arcs, and reinforcing sectors. All were executed with cold precision. Fear was controlled, tension harnessed, and discipline converted into lethality. The jungle became a corridor of destruction, where preparation amplified the Marines' strength and stripped the enemy of advantage. Within 30 minutes, the first wave of attackers had been decimated. Momentum, once a pillar of Japanese doctrine, had become a liability. The night was alive with the sound of battle, the rhythm of firing, and the chaos of men navigating lethal terrain. Guadalcanal had become a crucible, and the decisive moment of human endurance, strategy, and firepower was underway. By 2245, the full scope of the trap became clear. Japanese soldiers, now within 20 yards of the Marine trenches, faced an unrelenting wall of fire. Machine guns spat tracer rounds in arcs that crossed and converged. Mortars hammered concentrated clusters, and grenades erupted in succession, each detonation carving chaos into the advancing formations. The jungle, once concealment, now guided them directly into the prepared slaughter. Marines rotated weapons seamlessly, sustaining fire while officers signaled adjustments. Every sector was covered, every approach anticipated. Even small missteps by Japanese troops were exploited instantly. Their advance, disciplined and relentless in doctrine, collided with precision, leaving almost no chance for survival. Japanese commanders attempted desperate rallies. Orders to press forward echoed through the darkness, but fragmented units could not respond effectively. Entire squads were wiped out in seconds, and the psychological toll shattered morale. The human cost was immediate and catastrophic. Attrition became both a weapon and a psychological blow. Within 2 hours, the night had claimed more than 800 Japanese soldiers. Survivors scattered into the jungle, wounded, disoriented, and demoralized. Marines had held their lines with comparatively light casualties, the lethal combination of preparation, discipline, and terrain control proving decisive. By midnight, the battlefield quieted, save for the occasional crackle of smoldering fire or distant movement. The kill zones had fulfilled their purpose, transforming Japanese aggression into annihilation. Guadalcanal had shifted from a contested island to a testament of strategy, endurance, and human resilience. The consequences of this night would echo beyond its jungle confines, shaping morale, doctrine, and the course of the Pacific Campaign. As dawn broke over Guadalcanal, the aftermath of the night's engagement became starkly visible. The jungle floor was littered with the remnants of battle. Fallen Japanese soldiers, abandoned weapons, and churned mud from desperate movement. Smoke rose from smoldering vegetation where grenades and mortars had detonated, and the scent of gunpowder mixed with the earth itself. The kill zones, meticulously prepared, had inflicted catastrophic casualties on the attackers. Over 800 Japanese soldiers had perished within hours. For the Marines, the toll was far lighter, but fatigue and adrenaline weighed heavily. Men leaned on rifles, sweat and grime streaking their faces, eyes scanning for lingering threats. Despite exhaustion, their confidence surged. The discipline, training, and foresight that had guided them through the night had proved decisive. Every calculation, every prepared sector of fire, every moment of patience had translated into survival and overwhelming effectiveness. Japanese survivors faced a grim reality. Disoriented and under constant threat of patrols, many retreated into the jungle with injuries, hunger, and fear gnawing at them. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers trained to advance relentlessly found themselves forced to flee, their morale fractured. Commanders struggled to regroup fragmented units, but the scale of losses and chaos made recovery impossible in the immediate term. Strategically, the engagement demonstrated the lethal potential of preparation and terrain exploitation. Islands in the Pacific could be defended against numerically superior forces if attackers were funneled into pre-designated kill zones and subjected to coordinated firepower. Guadalcanal had become a blueprint for defensive success, proving that discipline, foresight, and tactical patience could achieve results far beyond raw numbers. The night had ended, but its lessons were just beginning. Commanders on both sides would study the engagement, seeking to replicate its effectiveness or avoid its catastrophe. The island had revealed the harsh arithmetic of war. Courage and momentum could be crushed by preparation, firepower, and human endurance. The long-term consequences of Guadalcanal's night engagement extended far beyond the battlefield. For the Japanese Army, the losses were staggering, not just in numbers but in morale and cohesion. Entire units had been decimated, and survivors were forced to retreat into disease-ridden jungle with minimal supplies. The combination of attrition, disease, and relentless Allied firepower broke the offensive capability of the troops stationed on the island. Japanese command recognized the impossibility of sustained assaults under such conditions, and future operations were constrained by fear of similar destruction. Guadalcanal had proven that doctrine and bravery alone could not overcome preparation, terrain, and firepower. For the Marines, the success reinforced the effectiveness of their defensive strategy. Controlled kill zones, overlapping fields of fire, and meticulous preparation had neutralized the enemy's numerical advantage. Training and discipline had translated into decisive results, confirming the doctrine of patience and calculated lethality. The campaign strengthened confidence in the ability of small, well-prepared forces to hold critical positions under extreme conditions. The engagement reshaped the broader Pacific strategy. Japanese forces began to adopt more cautious approaches, their supply lines increasingly vulnerable to Allied naval and air interdiction. For the Allies, momentum shifted. Guadalcanal became a turning point. It demonstrated that the initiative could be seized and maintained, attrition could be a weapon, and morale, logistics, and preparation were as decisive as combat prowess. Psychologically, the battle left lasting effects on both sides. Japanese soldiers carried the trauma of mass casualties and repeated failure, while the Marines bore the weight of killing on an unprecedented scale. The campaign illustrated the brutal intersection of human endurance, strategy, and technology. Survival depended not only on courage, but on adaptation, discipline, and the foresight to exploit every tactical advantage. Guadalcanal had transformed from a contested island into a proving ground, a place where human will, preparation, and calculated lethality collided, leaving enduring lessons for commanders, soldiers, and history itself. Reflection/closure. Guadalcanal stands as a stark testament to the brutality and complexity of modern warfare. The island was more than a battlefield. It was a crucible of human endurance, discipline, and strategy. Over 800 Japanese soldiers perished in a single night, victims not only of bullets and grenades, but of preparation, terrain, and calculated defensive tactics. For the Marines, the victory was hard-earned, achieved through patience, training, and unwavering focus, but it came at the moral cost of witnessing mass slaughter. The battle revealed the unforgiving arithmetic of war. Courage and aggression, once decisive qualities, could be neutralized by disciplined strategy and environmental mastery. Human will, though remarkable, could not substitute for preparation or technological advantage. For the Japanese Army, Guadalcanal shattered doctrine, morale, and offensive capability, leaving psychological scars that rippled through subsequent campaigns. Yet the campaign also underscored the resilience of the human spirit. Marines endured exhaustion, disease, and relentless tension, transforming fear into precision and lethality. Soldiers adapted to the unforgiving jungle, using both intellect and training to turn chaos into advantage. Guadalcanal became a proving ground, demonstrating that in warfare, success is forged as much by preparation and endurance as by bravery alone. Historically, Guadalcanal marked a turning point in the Pacific War. It showed that the Allies could seize and maintain initiative, that attrition and logistics could be as decisive as force of arms, and that human endurance, tested to its limits, remains at the center of every conflict. The lessons of the island, of discipline under fire and the cost of strategy executed flawlessly, resonate far beyond its shores. Guadalcanal was hell on earth, but from that crucible emerged clarity. Preparation, patience, and human resilience can break even the most determined adversaries, forever altering the course of history.